Hey, second graders. We are back to another journey story this week, and we are reading Working in Space. So if you don't have your journeys book with you, please go grab it so you can be following along. I'm going to just be holding the book in my lap this week, so it's real important that you have your book in front of you so you can follow along as I'm reading. And when you get your book, it is on page 414, Working in Space. What kind of book do you think this is, or what kind of story? Are you thinking maybe nonfiction, right? Because it's about space, and if you look at the cover, it's a real picture, isn't it? Right? It's a real picture in space. And if we take a little peek at the genre section on page 414, it says informational text. It gives facts about a topic, right? It is true. It's going to give us facts, and those facts are going to be about working in space. And we also want to think back, and we did these quite a few times in the school year, but it's been a while. Text and graphic features. Those are just things in nonfiction stories that help you understand the text better and can give you some more information. So there is a text or graphic feature on the first page of the story, 415. That's a title page, right? So title pages always come first. They tell you the title, obviously. They tell you the author, and sometimes they give you more information, like where the book was published, when it was published, and if there was an illustrator, okay? Working in Space. There's that first page. We see a rocket, 416. There's a rocket, right? Leaving Earth. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You following along? The space shuttle blasts off. Astronauts on the shuttle are going to work. Some stay on the shuttle and some work at the space station. 2 astronauts have already started working. The shuttle commander is in charge of the shuttle and the crew. The pilot flies the shuttle. So there are quite a few text and graphic features I want us to kind of look at on this page here. So obviously 416, right? That is just a photograph. That's a text and graphic feature. Photographs, pictures, illustrations, those are text and graphic features that show you more about what you're learning about. Now 417, the page I just read to you, has a couple text and graphic features. Do you remember what it's called? The part that is blue that says Leaving Earth. Do you remember what those little titles are called? Headings, right? Headings just give you an idea of, well, what is this page going to be about, right? And then we also have 2 things in the picture. Those are labels. So they're telling us that one is the commander and the other is the pilot. So that's another text and graphic feature. And then we have one more on that page. Do you see the word space? What's special about the word space? Well, it's highlighted yellow, right? And it is called a key word. It tells us that's an important word, and it's actually one of our vocabulary words, right? So this page was all about astronauts leaving. Some of them stay on the shuttle, and some of them go into the space station and actually do work. And we have a commander and a pilot. Flip the page. We're on 418. Follow along with your finger. Let's read the headings together. Jobs in space. 3 mission specialists are on board the shuttle. They work on experiments or climb outside to fix satellites. They have to prepare the food, too. A company or university might want to do an experiment in space. An astronaut called a payload specialist will work on the experiment. So what is this section about? What is jobs in space teaching us about? It's about the different jobs that people can do in space. Just because you're an astronaut doesn't mean you're the same kind of astronaut as someone else that's up in space. You might have different jobs that you have to do while you are up there. All right, next page. Let's read the heading together again. Working in space. The space shuttle travels around Earth so fast that it is like falling. Everything inside falls too. It makes astronauts and everything in the shuttle float around. This is called weightlessness. Astronauts do not work at desks and tables. Everything would float off because of weightlessness. They have to use tape to stick everything down. So there's no gravity in space, right? Gravity is what holds us to the ground. It's what makes it so my book doesn't float off when I'm trying to read it. But when you're in space, it's no gravity. So everything is weightless. It floats. You've probably seen videos or pictures or things on TV about astronauts in space and how everything floats around. So they have to tape it down or they have to hook it down so it doesn't float around the space station. Right? So what's an important tool that astronauts might need up there? Maybe tape, right? Or screws or things to hook it down with. Next page, page 420. Read the heading with me. Astronaut training. Astronauts need special training. They study at a university and then do a year of basic astronaut training. Astronauts learn math, science, and astronomy. They also practice using space equipment. Astronauts practice working in water. Their suits are filled with air to make them float. It helps them learn what it will be like in space. To become an astronaut, you have to go to college and then do a year of special astronaut training. The word astronomy is highlighted. That's a key word, and it's also a vocabulary word. Do you remember what that means from the vocab lesson this week? Astronomy means you study space. And we have a new text or graphic feature on this page. Do you see it down by the picture? Do you remember what those little text boxes are called by the pictures? Captions, right? So captions just tell you more about what the picture is. They're different than labels because they actually give you an explanation, okay? So let's read the caption to see what they're doing underwater. Underwater, it feels like you weigh less than on land. This is what it is like in space. So the astronauts train underwater so they can kind of get what it feels like to be weightless or floating, right? So they train under there so they learn how to use tools and do other things. Read the next heading. Experiments on astronauts. Living in space can change the human body. Astronauts often take part in experiments to find out how to keep healthy in space. In space, astronauts do not use their bones and muscles very much. They can get very weak. Astronauts need to exercise every day in space. Why do you think their muscles and their bones get weak in space? What makes us stronger? We have to exercise, right? Or when you go to pick something up and it might feel heavy, right? That's going to work your muscles. Think about that in space. You don't have to use those muscles because everything floats. You don't even have to use muscles to move around because you just float. So imagine doing that for a long time. Your muscles are going to get very weak. So they have to exercise. Let's read the caption before we move on. This experiment measures how much air an astronaut uses while exercising. So that lady in the picture, she's exercising, but she's breathing into something that measures how much oxygen and how much air is she breathing as she's exercising. So they do experiments on them to find things out. Next page, we should be on 422. Heading says, other experiments. Scientists want to find out how living in space affects plants and animals. Astronauts have taken bees, ants, and fish into space to see what happens to them. Astronauts also test to see what happens to chemicals in space. They use a sealed box with gloves sticking into it so the experiment does not float away. So if we look carefully at the picture there, right? So you see that guy is kind of sitting in front of a box. It's a plastic box that he sticks his hands, you can't really see, but he sticks his hands into it. So there's some holes with some gloves so he can work on some sort of an experiment. If they were trying to do this, say on a table or somewhere else, all of their materials would float away. So they have to put it inside this box so whatever they're working on stays in one place, right? Imagine trying to do your school work and your pencil kept floating off your desk, your paper, your eraser, right? And you have to chase them around. It's easier if they keep their experiment inside of a box so their objects don't float all over the space station. Okay. 423. taking photos in space. Astronauts also take pictures and videos of themselves living in space. The photos help people on Earth understand what it looks like to live in space. Astronauts take pictures of Earth too. These photos are often beautiful as well as educational. They can show Earth's landforms and weather in ways that can never be seen from Earth. So look at the caption. What is that a picture of? An erupting volcano. So they are up in space, and you can see the guy with his camera in the space station, and he's taking a picture of a volcano erupting. It's kind of neat to see it from up above, isn't it? So before we move on page 423, can you help me find one fact on that page? There's lots of them, right? You can take pictures and videos in space. They can show Earth's landforms and weather, right? But there is an opinion on there. Do you see the opinion? These photos are often beautiful. Maybe somebody doesn't think that. I think it's a pretty cool picture, but maybe somebody doesn't agree with that, right? Now, before we move on, stop and think also. How do the heading and photos help you understand the text? So the heading on this page is taking photos in space. When you read the heading, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you you're going to read about taking photos, right? And if we look at the picture, it actually helps us see what those photos look like. Instead of just reading about them, we can actually see what a photo from space would look like. Next page, 424. Heading, fixing satellites. Satellites that orbit Earth sometimes break down and need repair. They cannot be taken to a workshop. Specially trained astronauts have to fix them. The shuttle pilot finds the satellite and moves the shuttle near it. An astronaut uses the shuttle's robotic arm to pull the satellite into the shuttle's cargo bay. There are some new text and graphic features on this page. Do you see where it says cargo bay and robotic arm, right? Those are labels because this is actually a diagram. It's showing you what the space station looks like. So if something breaks, they can't just take it into the repair shop because it's up in space. So they actually have to bring it closer so the astronauts can work on what's wrong. Right? Next page, working outside. People who work outside on Earth sometimes wear special clothing. Some clothing protects workers. Some clothing is brightly colored so the workers can be seen easily. Astronauts wear special clothing when they work outside too. Outside the shuttle, there is no air to breathe and it can be uncomfortably warm. Can we read the caption together? Spacesuits protect astronauts, give them air, and keep them cool. So look at the clothing there, right? Do you see what he's wearing? You can see kind of something on his back. That's going to give him oxygen, right? Because there's no air to breathe in space, okay? And then he's got a spacesuit, a helmet, and lots of other equipment on to protect him. And we'll learn more about that on the next page. So go ahead and flip to 426. Suiting up. What do you think this page is going to be about? Suiting up. Maybe their spacesuit, right? The headings kind of give you a preview of what you're going to read. Astronauts must wear special spacesuits to go out of the shuttle. The spacesuits allow the astronauts to breathe and stay cool. Every part of their bodies is covered. Astronauts use an airlock to leave the shuttle. The airlock is a room between the shuttle and space. In the airlock, the door to the shuttle seals shut, and then the outer door into space can be opened. Caption, read it together. Spacesuits are sealed at the neck, right here, the wrists, and around the waist. Stop and think question. Why do you think the author has chosen to describe an airlock? So let me describe it to you a little bit more. So in order for the astronaut to leave the space shuttle, they can't just open the door and go, right? If they open the door in space, things would fly out of the space station, right? Or they could get sucked out of the space station, and that would be really dangerous. So what they do, they have this little room. So imagine that I'm in a space shuttle right now and outer space is in front of me, right? I've got this little room here. So it opens the first door. I walk into the little room and it shuts that door. Now I'm in a little room. Then it can safely open the door and I can go out to space without having anything in the space station get sucked out, right? And the astronaut has to wear the spacesuit to go outside because they need to be able to breathe. So their helmet, right, is connected to the oxygen tank on their back so they can breathe when they go out there. They also wear gloves, right? They don't want anything to be exposed because it could be really, really hot out there or really, really cold, right? And you don't want your skin to touch those things. So they have to be covered from head to toe. And it gets sealed, remember, it said around the wrists. It's got a seal around the neck so nothing gets in, and then again around their waist. 427, gloves and ties. Spacesuits are hard to move in. Gloves make finger movements tricky. Jobs that take a few minutes on Earth can take hours in space. In space, astronauts and equipment can float away. Astronauts tie equipment to their suits. Sometimes astronauts are tied to the shuttle too. So do you see how puffy their gloves are? Think about when you wear snow gloves or mittens. It's really hard to do things, right? Have you ever tried to tie your shoe or zip up your coat when you have gloves on? So imagine being an astronaut and trying to do things on the space shuttle when you got these big gloves on, right? So it takes a long time. They also, anything they bring with them, a tool that they need to use or anything else, they got to strap it to them. If it's just in their pocket or hanging there, when they get out into space, what's going to happen to it? It's going to float away, right? So they have to strap it on so they can use their tool and they won't lose it. All right, next page. We got a couple more to go. 428. Moving around. Sometimes astronauts need to move around a lot outside the shuttle. They wear a backpack with rocket power called a Manned Maneuvering Unit, or MMU. The MMU tank is filled with gas. The astronaut squeezes a handle and gas comes out with enough force to move the astronaut around. So you've probably seen these in cartoons or other things like a rocket booster or something like that. They have something kind of like that because when they're in space and there's no gravity, how are they going to move around? There's nothing to walk on. They just be floating. So if they need to move around, they push a little thing and gas comes out of the back of their suit, right? So gas comes out of the back of their suit and they can kind of steer themselves like a jetpack around in space. But most of the time they're tied on to the space shuttle because if something went wrong, they could accidentally float off into space, right? Not good. Working on other worlds. 12 astronauts have worked on the moon. Not very many people. They collected rocks from the moon's surface. This helps scientists learn about Earth and about living on other worlds. So that is a picture taken on the moon, and you can see an astronaut. You can see an American flag. Do you see it in the background? It's really small. And then just some other space equipment because they were studying. All right, the last page of the story. Scientists explored Mars using a remote-controlled robot called Sojourner. Scientists think that in the future, people might be able to live and work on Mars. So that's Sojourner. That's like a little robot. It's got wheels and they can control it, but it actually landed on Mars and we have pictures of what it looks like on the planet of Mars. Would you want to explore in space? Would you want to go up to the moon or other planets in the future? Something to think about, right? Now that we have read our story, it is your turn to go back, just like we do. We want to be good readers and read carefully. So you're going to want to go back and read the story a second time carefully. And then your activity this week has to do with text and graphic features. So first, there's a little Google slide just to remind you what's a text and graphic feature. We talked about them, right? Title pages, headings, photographs, captions, labels, keywords, diagrams, things like that. But there's a review Google slide for you to go over, okay, and listen to. And when you've done that, you actually have to go back in your story and find the different text or graphic features, record their page number. And then there is a comprehension quiz, so make sure you read carefully. I'll see you guys next week. Bye, second graders.